My birth name was Alice Bernice Clements. I was born in 1927 at my grandmother's house. There was no doctor, there was just the other women in the area came in to help. I was born to Homer and Amy Clements, then moved down to Cedar Creek, and our family had a home and 360 acres there. My oldest brother was Nathan. The one that passed away was Forrest. Then there was my sister. We called her Betty, but her real name was Elizabeth. Then myself, and the two little girls that died at birth were Nettie and Nellie. We lived a mile and a half from the nearest neighbor and 12 miles from Kuski, way out in the woods. I was in the 8th grade before I ever saw Lewiston. We spent a lot of time, we worked from the time we were little. Not so much housework, although we did that also. My sister was better at it than I. But we helped with planting, with weeding. It was an awfully good life. We had a roof over our head, plenty to eat, clothes to wear. My mother always said that I was born with a curiosity button, and she'd like to shut it off. I was always interested in anything and everything new. One day my parents were planting potatoes, and I knew if you planted the potatoes, new potatoes came up. I wanted a new pair of shoes. I planted my shoes and they never did find them. Anyway, I got a new pair of shoes, but a little trouble too. My father taught me to read before I started school. One day I was reading to him and he said, well, what did you read? And I said, I don't know, I wasn't listening. He laughed at me. Believe me, from then on I listened when I read. At that time, country schools were 4 miles apart, built all over the countryside. And the reason for that, they didn't want the children to have to walk more than 4 miles to get to school. We went about 2 miles through a dark canyon and then up to the road where the school was. There was all 8 grades in the school, 1 teacher. The schools closed at the end of the 4th grade. All the country schools closed. And on my 5th grade, my folks rented a little house in Kuski. My dad stayed home and took care of the animals, and Mother moved down there with us. And he'd come down weekends sometimes. Well, high school was rather different for me. My father had sold the service station he had in Stites because the work was too hard for him, and the doctor said he might be in less pain if he went to Arizona. So we went to Arizona. And I didn't go to school that year at all. My sister had gone to San Diego to work, and she came when Mother was in the hospital for appendicitis. And when Mother was able to be out of the hospital again, she was going to go back to California, so I went back with her. I got a job working for the Navy. Boy, if you worked for the Navy, you got pretty good money for a woman. And I was only, well, I was 16 when I started, 17 when I finished. But that's why I was Rosie the Riveter. My father wasn't better enough, and it was hard to get jobs in Phoenix because so many doctors sent so many people, and they'd take their families with them. There just weren't many jobs to have in Phoenix, Arizona at that time. So they quit the job there and moved back to Stites, bought a grocery store. And the grocery store had a telephone office in it. Well, I wanted to finish my high school, so I quit my job in California and moved back to Stites. I went to high school, and at night, evenings and nights, before I had to go to school, I ran the telephone office for Mother because it had to be run 24 hours a day. And so there was a curtain across the back of the telephone office, and I had a cot back there. So if it rang in the middle of the night, I had to get up and answer it. About the only thing that really was that important was in case somebody was trying to call a doctor, because all those calls came through the telephone office. I graduated high school in 1947, and then I went back to California to work. I went back and worked in a restaurant, a friend's restaurant. Then she bought one in Seattle, so she moved me with her up to Seattle. Even gave me a room in her house in Seattle. And one day I was talking to my parents. Dad said he needed me to come home to help him drive to Kansas. I came home, and when I got into Stites, they were having a local group of men having a baseball game. And I met a guy that I really liked. In fact, I told my mother that night, I'm going to marry him, and I did. Larry and I got married in December. Larry had a 5-year-old son when we got married. His name was Fred. He didn't want me working after we got married. Well, I worked for several months, and then we moved to Stites. Then Larry was born. Not Junior, he was Larry and not Lawrence, and Carla. And I had been out of town, and when I got back into town, I went to the post office to get my mail, and there was 2 men standing there talking, and they had their back to me. And one said to the other, I hear one of the Soton boys got killed this morning. I made a mad dash across to the telephone office where I'd worked, called the sheriff's office. And they said, yes, one had been shot. They didn't know which one. But when the ambulance came in, Jack was sitting up and Larry wasn't, so I knew he was the one that had been injured. We were trying to get him to the hospital in Lewiston that had more equipment, and we got just across the bridge down at Spalding, and the nurse said he was dead. So we went on to Lewiston. I went inside. The doctor went out and checked on him. They never even took him in there. I had just collapsed, and I wanted to die too. But one of the nurses came up to me and she said, you set up and straighten out. You've got 3 kids depending on you. It was the best thing ever done to me. At the time, I was a little mad. The good Lord looked after me, and Lewis Clark State College wasn't called that at the time, but it opened up. I was with the first class. I moved to Lewiston so I could go to school, took the children with me. Education wasn't the field I would really have liked to go into, but I had 3 children. I had to be there for them. So I went into education. I had met Vince while I was going to school down here. He was working in the local mail. 2 different superintendents came to the school looking for teachers. And I was offered another job up beyond the Grand Round River, because they needed children in their school to keep their school, and I had 3. But I didn't think I wanted to be that far away. I had met my second husband right then, and I was interested. So I took the Winchester one. I taught there for 2 years. One day, when we were all in the car, including Carla, she proposed for him. She said, "Why don't you marry my mother?" And so he said, "You know, that's a good idea. I think I will." So that's how we got engaged. Got married in December also, although not the same day. I was still teaching at Winchester at the time. And then at the end of that year, I quit that job because Vince wanted me over in Ferdinand. He didn't want to have to drive back and forth all the time. Then I had another baby. It happens. That was Greg. The next one was Mike and Shelley and Alyssa and Maria. One night I was to a card party in Ferdinand, and Tony Arnson said to me, "You have a teaching license, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I don't know whether it's still good after all this time." And he said, "Would you consider teaching for us?" They had a school in Ferdinand. The first and second was taught by the nuns. The third, fourth, and fifth was taught by whoever they could hire. And seventh and eighth was taught by the nuns. I talked to Vince about it, and he said, "Do you want to?" And I said, "Well, yeah, if I can." I taught there for 2 years in Ferdinand. Then when that school closed, I moved over to Cottonwood, to the public school in Cottonwood. I taught there for 22 years, I think. I retired at the age of 65. I would have and could have taught until I was 72, but Vince was very ill by then. And so I retired. He was filling with fluid in the back of his neck, and it caused mental problems. It wasn't the one everybody gets, Alzheimer's, but the effect was about the same. And he kept, of course, getting worse and worse. The doctor told me they could take some of the fluid out. There's a name for it, but I can't think what it is at the moment. But he wouldn't get any better. Maybe he wouldn't get worse, but there was just no point. And there was a 50% chance he wouldn't live through the surgery, so we didn't. And all the family gathered around, and we stayed down here until he passed away, the whole family. Sister came in and talked to him. And I think she did a lot of good, because she said, "Vince, it's time for you to go." And that night he did. So the first real traveling I did, other than in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, was in Indonesia. My youngest daughter, Maria's husband, was working in Indonesia in the mines. He's a mining engineer. And he was working over there, so I went over and spent Christmas with him. I spent 21 days in China. So I got to climb on the Great Wall, saw the terracotta soldiers. Then I went to the whole Egypt. I went to Italy when my son Greg was stationed there. We went to the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and it was really leaning. We went to Venice, the Colosseum. We went to, we saw the Pope come out and bless the people. I went to Germany when Greg was stationed there. My kids moving around a lot helped me. In Germany, we went to the Black Forest. Yes, I went to Peru and went up the Amazon River. I got to go to Machu Picchu, which is, I think, 8,000 feet above sea level. But I've gone up and down almost all of the 7 largest rivers on Earth. The Yangtze, the Nile, the Amazon, the Mississippi, of course. In the Sea of Galilee, I put my foot in that. I went swimming in the Salton Sea. When Greg was stationed in Korea, I flew over there and spent a week and a half with him over there. That's the first time I tried sitting on a cushion on the floor to eat my dinner. I went to Lourdes in France. I want to go to Scotland. My people came from Scotland and Ireland. And I got to go to Ireland. My grandson went with me. And we went from one side of Ireland up and down. I have traveled quite a bit overseas. I also have gone to all 50 of the United States. I had gone to every one of them except Vermont. I went to New York with Carla, and her daughter-in-law and the daughter-in-law's mother took me to Vermont, so that I got to go to Vermont. I've been at both sides of Canada. I've been on both sides of Mexico. So I'm just a wanderer, but I love to travel. I have had a wonderful life. I've got a wonderful family. I've done a lot of things, but I somehow managed to raise some wonderful kids. I have 22 grandkids, 28 great-grandchildren, 9 great-great-grandchildren, and 2 on the way. I'm populating the world. They're great kids. They all work. They do things that are for other people, not just for themselves, and I'm proud of them. Things can look awfully bad, but if you stand up and straighten up, as that nurse told me, you can make it better. You can make a good life, and I have a good life.